Greetings and welcome to another episode of Flambo's Late Night Musings. Tonight's story harks back to the summer of 1971 in North Hill, Akron, Ohio. It's called Confessions of a Juvenile Delinquent. We were just a bunch of bored juveniles drinking ice cold red Ripple on a humid, sunny summer afternoon at the pond behind the high school. It was Killer, Rick J, Mona, Flicks, and myself, a small portion of the neighborhood gang haunting the venues and parks of North Hill. The Vietnam War was raging and the world was changing at a rapid rate. Anarchy and revolution were the topics of conversation, along with whatever else, what other laughs we could get out of each other. Rick J and Killer were cranking their asses off and busied themselves messing with the abandoned rafts that somebody had made last spring by attaching wooden planks to empty 55-gallon drums. The rest of us would rather just languish under the shade of a small crabapple tree on the shore. Those planks were weakly tied to the barrels in a half-hearted job and weathered by the sun and the rain. The two had repaired one and tried to talk us all to go out and float on the pond and smoke a joint. 5 people out in the middle of a pond getting stoned on a 5x5 rickety-ass platform didn't sound like such a good idea to the rest of us. You are absolutely fucking nuts if you think that thing can hold a bunch of us from Flicks. You guys go on out there and have some fun. We'll smoke our own joint here on the shore and make sure you don't drown yourselves. Yeah, we'll be your own personal lifeguards, from Mona. Maybe you ought to test it first, I said. Rick J and Killer didn't take to the jibes. You guys are just a bunch of pies. Chicken shit pies, spouts Killer. Killer carried his perpetual chip on his shoulder, always the crank attitude and never one to smile much. The fact that it was 90 degrees with flies buzzing around us didn't help much either. Of us all, he had the least stable family life, as he got beat a lot, you could tell. He'd relate stories of his fist fights with his dad. His dad poured cement all day and was a mean drunk just like his son. Killer was getting to be a big guy, though, and he was starting to give old Dad a run for his money. But nonetheless, we had put them down, and in their pseudo-psychotic state, something had to even the score, and that something all of a sudden came strolling down the path on his way home. Bradley Savant, dork of the town. What are you doing coming around here, from Killer? Just going home. Savant was a gangly, bookish type, played trumpet in the band and a little above average in school. I dated his sister a year before. Real cutie, but pretty attached to her virtue. Going home? Going home? We need you to help us here. We need you to test this raft. Yeah, said Rick J, piqued by an inward need to cause shit. You can pass here. You can't pass here. You're just gonna have to take the raft across. And he landed the raft on the muddy bank. I ain't getting that thing. I'm just going home. And he started past them. Killer grabs him and holds him close, nose to nose. Killer had a mammoth head with close, bleary eyes and hair sticking out all over the place like a modern-day Neanderthal. His breath reflected his general overall attitude. You're going on the raft, and we're going to make sure you don't get off. As he dragged him down to the pond, Rick J grabbed some rope from the other raft, and they proceeded to tie Savant's spread eagle to the planks on the raft. The rest of us looked on in amusement to see how far these fuckers would take this. Mona was getting upset, and we caught her drift that this may have gone a little bit too far. I must admit, though, that we were caught in the morbid curiosity of this whole thing. But honestly, it didn't look like it was going to end very well at all. Mona got up and started after him. Killer shoved the raft off despite her protest, and it slowly drifted to the middle of the lake. Brad was yelling and crying and trying to get free from the ropes, swaying and rocking the raft back and forth. In the process, the ropes fastening the planks to the barrels loosened up, and one of the barrels rolled free. With no balance, the raft immediately inverted itself so that Savant was now tied helplessly underwater, the lone barrel floating on top. Killer and Rick J were laughing uncontrollably, rolling on the ground. When that raft flipped, it was somewhat reminiscent of Buster Keaton's Silent Short. The dark comedy of it didn't escape Flicks or myself. We kind of looked at each other with this who's going to move first to save him look. We waited for the other to make a move, the timelessness of the situation having us stunned. Mona glared at us in horror. Will you guys do something? I ain't going out there from Killer. Come on, you pies, what are you going to do? And he stared us down. There was really no use dealing with Killer in a Mexican standoff. Fucker was suicidal. Rick J stood silent. Flicks got up first and I followed. We ran to the lake and swam out to the raft. Once out there, trying to upturn the raft by pushing up on one side was futile. We just sank. By climbing on one end and grabbing the ropes, we were able to flip the raft so Brad could get a breath. It was an awkward thing, though, because the raft wanted to overturn again, pushing us underwater. On the second try, the whole raft ripped apart, and we all tumbled in a chaos of wood and rope and terror. When we got our bearings back, Savant was floundering with his hands still tied to the plank. He was kicking hard to keep afloat, a pelagic Jesus on his cross, swearing and crying bloody hell the whole time. Flicks pulled him into the shallow water, and we untied his hands. Poor fucker was shaking when he stumbled ashore. He doubled over and puked into the grass. He looked back with the most bitter and hateful look that I've ever seen on a person. You wouldn't think someone that nice could even muster such a look. Hey, man, from Rick J. We're just having a little fun. No hard feelings, man. Glad you're okay. RJ was a master of crocodile kindness. Killer didn't have that capacity. You better not stitch us out, fucker. I know where you live, and I'll really fuck you up. Actually, Killer just lived around the corner from Savant, who knew what Killer was capable of doing. He stomped off Soggy without another word, just that feared look over his shoulder as he walked through the scrub towards Gorge Boulevard. Once he was out of sight, we discussed whether he would snitch us out to someone. We had to survive these streets and suffer the retribution of Killer if he snitched, knowing that there might not be anyone around to save his ass the next time. On North Hill, you handle things yourself. You don't implicate the authorities. The whole thing was fucked up, and we let the two fuckers know it, too. They were immune to it, though. Their psychological defenses and nihilistic rationalizations were strong, built from lives of scams and abuse. They split soon afterwards, and the rest of us went home. The wine was gone, and we were getting hungry. Felt good on that hot day to walk home with the wet clothes hanging from us and a little cheap wine buzz and Mexican marijuana. We were in the hot, muggy summer days of youth and knew that things would get harder as we matured. When this shit happens to adults, the impacts were far worse. We carried our luck in the shelter of our adolescence. The real impact of the events of that day simmered in my mind. What if we let that poor fucker drown? I wouldn't have let it happen, although without Flicks there, I might not have been able to save him in time. I'm sure Mona would have helped. I wondered later that night if Killer and Rick J would have jumped in to save his ass. They were capable of saving their own asses from a murder rap, I was sure. It didn't keep me from wandering, though. Sometimes these situations just emerge from nowhere. I wasn't looking to harm anyone that day. Dude on a raft floating down the line would have been good enough for me. So, 4 months later, in the deep December winter, Savant got electrocuted while stealing glass insulators from telephone poles out at the gorge. The pole was wet and the wires were bare from the decades of those harsh Ohio seasons. The shock threw him from the top of the pole 20 feet down to the edge of the sandstone bluff of the Cuyahoga River Gorge. The speed and inertia of the blast threw him down over another 10 feet onto the rock below. He wasn't moving. His buddy Buck had to run up the frozen path to the neighborhood alongside Riverside Drive to get someone to call the ambulance. We didn't see him in school for a couple of weeks, and when he arrived, he had one of those neck braces. I ran into him at lunch. Man, you gotta watch yourself. Maybe you should go to church or something. I was trying to be funny and let him know I felt bad for him, but realized as I was saying it that the Savants were a pretty pious family, very church-going. I could be pretty stupid that way sometimes. Well, what do you mean by that? He gives me this puzzled look. I don't know, just be careful. He walked away in his teenage nerd angst. I cowered on into world lit. Savant had a few bad breaks, that's all. He turned out to be all right in the end. Loving family, beautiful sister, funny mom, a dad with fortitude and leadership, but a bit wooden. You couldn't say that for Killer, just a block away in a different universe, an alternate existence. Summer came again, and we all found ourselves back at our hangout on the hills of Patterson Park. Nothing much had changed. Grand Funk, Led Zeppelin, and Alice Cooper had great new songs on the radio. New forms of pot were showing up. Meshmacan, Thai Stick, Sensimilia. New cheap wines were hitting the market. Night Train and Annie Green Springs, and as always, new adventures. Some of us went on to scratch out an earnest existence. Others were thrown into the throes of alcoholism and drug abuse. As for Killer, some people get so used to meanness that that's how they relate to the whole world. And unless you watch yourself, you get caught up in it too. He lasted a couple more years until he died of alcohol poisoning, passed out in his front yard. The cabbie that dropped him off was a schoolmate of ours. He found him leaning against a pole at Bailey's tap room and gave him a free lift home. Rick J. had a coke-induced heart attack walking down Dayton Street one May afternoon. His brother was facing a life sentence for killing a rent-a-cop during a robbery attempt at a tire warehouse. Flicks and I got implicated in a drug deal gone wrong. He ended up with 3 months. I got 3 years probation. I saw the writing on the wall and left North Hill, and he's somewhere living in America. Mona married the wrong guy and struggled with the drugs for a long while. There are stories like this all across America. Sometimes things just go wrong somewhere along the line. It's no use asking for forgiveness for bad judgments that you make. You just live with them and hopefully know better the next time. Thank you.